So I guess the first point is, again, to sort of reiterate where I started, in that there's this gap between expectations and the current technology. And so we should always, when we're thinking about the future and 5-10 years in the future, ground ourselves in reality as to, where are things actually at, and start from there. But the biggest opportunities for social robots interacting in social environments are, as I said before, sort of healthcare and education, retail, transport, things where they can physically interact with the world around them, virtually interact with connected systems, and emotionally and socially interact with people. I think we're starting to see the first sort of iterations, as I said, of these social robots entering home environments now with the likes of Amazon Alexa and Google Home. There are robots like Jibo, if you have heard of that, which is sort of meant to be one of the first social robots for the home. The next iteration of Amazon Alexas and Google Homes that are starting to come out, bringing that to life a little bit more, adding layers of personality and sort of physical embodiment and the ability to physically sort of move and manipulate around. Those are the next things that are sort of coming into our lives, into our home lives, into places where into your office, places where you go to eat, and places where you go to catch a plane, things like that. As we get more and more used to interacting with these devices, which look very sort of human-like and act very organically, and we interact with them in a very human-like way, it becomes more and more important for us to understand and design these technologies, as I said, with a sort of social intelligence. And that's because we tend to anthropomorphize these things. So we already interact with our phones in a very sort of human-like way. A lot of people treat their phones better than they treat other people, right? It's a very sort of close connection that we have with that piece of technology. But that's a little square thing. When you add onto that layers of sort of physical appearance, like a humanoid type appearance, like the robot at the back, and you add on organic movements, and then sort of more conversational speech, and some sort of rationality or ability to sort of think and at least appear sort of to have some human-like intelligence, we then are going to engage with those things on a much closer level. We anthropomorphize them, so we attribute them with intentions and emotions and feelings that they don't necessarily have, but that causes us to have a really, really strong bond with these things, like you see in the movie Her. And that's a great thing from the perspective of the people designing these things, because they get a really close connection between their product and their customers, and it's a really sort of strong connection. But it leaves sort of gaps for vulnerability, sort of and sort of emotional manipulation by these AIs, intentionally or unintentionally, because you have such a strong emotional and social bond between the human and the AI, particularly when you're thinking about examples like in healthcare or aged care or education, when you're dealing with people who have sort of vulnerabilities. It's really important for us to sort of understand how to design these things with this, as I said, social intelligence in mind, so that when people are bonding with these on a really close level, they're not being sort of manipulated in any way that we don't want. A current day example of this is the Amazon Alexa, and people already starting to talk about how they don't want their children around Amazon Alexas or interacting with them, because they're turning their children into assholes, is sort of that's the quote that you see all around the place. Alexa is turning my child into an asshole. And the reason for that is because to engage with Alexa, you don't need to do that in a way you would engage with a human. If you ask a human and say, oh, can you, what's the weather today? And they say, oh, it's sunny and 30 degrees. You say, oh, thanks. You don't have to say that to Alexa. Alexa doesn't expect that, and Alexa doesn't give it back to you either. So even that simple sort of mannerisms thing is completely gone. And if you're a child learning how to interact, then it's very difficult to distinguish between interacting with Alexa versus interacting with another child or another person. A very simple example, but that becomes more and more sort of important as we go into the future and we start interacting with more of these types of devices on a really sort of social and emotional level. The next sort of challenge and opportunity then to face is if we want to design these AIs to have to be more human-like, to get to a human-like level of intelligence and to interact with us in a human-to-human-like way, what model do we use for that? So we've got, you alluded to the example before of Microsoft and their Tay chatbot, which they just released out into the Twitter sphere, and then it learnt how to interact with other people based on what it got tweeted towards it. And so as a result, it went from being this sort of chatbot, which was like, oh, hey, everyone, it's groovy to be here, da-da-da, to being the sort of a xenophobic, racist, homophobic, the most homophobic, racist tweeter on Twitter, which is a feat in and of itself. And that's because it learned from Twitterers how to interact with other people. So the question then becomes, what model do we use for designing these things which are going to interact with us in a social manner? Because there are very few absolutes in ethics or morals or anything like that. We all have sort of different opinions on how we should interact with things and how people should think and how things should act. So that's a massive challenge, but also a massive opportunity for us all to start thinking about, as this AI gets more and more advanced and more human-like and more integrated into our lives in a physical form, in a virtual form, etc., how are these things going to be designed and what model do we use for their design so that we have positive human experiences when we're interacting with them on a customer level or consumer basis, or when we're working alongside them in the same organization?